Hello.
Welcome to another SoundFlow webinar. Joining me today is 3 times Grammy Award-winning mix engineer producer Andrew Scheps. Andrew's worked with such artists as Red Hot Chili Peppers, Adele, Beyonce, Metallica, Black Sabbath, Ziggy Marley, Low Roar, and that is just to name a handful. He's you may have seen him on popular YouTube series such as Andrew Talks to Awesome People and Between Two Shows. And he's a great guy and one of my favorite humans. And today he's here to release 2 new SoundFlow apps. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm good. Embarrassed after that intro, but I'm good. Great to see you, Kitch.
You're
Thanks
a
for
high
doing it.
achieving mate, and we love having you here.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure.
So you've been busy making in your spare time, in between mixing hit albums.
My second full-time job.
Second full-time job, yes, of course. So you've been creating some apps and apps that work on the SoundFlow platform. And I think we've got 2 apps that you're releasing today. The first one being the Scheps Transport Deck and the Scheps Track Selector.
Yes.
Sounds very cool. Should we start off with the Scheps Transport Deck?
Yeah, here, I'm going to move this screen to the other screen there so that we don't get a lot of video feedback.
Let's share your screen.
Yeah. All right. So here is the transport deck. Why don't I make it really huge for a second?
Fantastic.
Because you can do that. That is, I got to say, it's one of the things that's so great about the SoundFlow apps you build is they can be absolutely any size and you don't really have to think about it, which is good. Because obviously, like, this is crazy big right now and kind of in the way. But if you're working on a Retina display, it might need to be that many pixels. And you never have to worry about that. But anyway, yes, so this is a pretty simple deck on the surface that does most of the functions that are done by the Pro Tools Transport. And I built it because, well, the real reason is, and this is sort of like the big payoff moment, but we could save it to the end, or I'll say it right now. I'm going to show it to you running on the screen. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you, you're going to say, well, okay, yeah, but I can already just do that on the Pro Tools screen. Like, there's literally a button that does the same thing, like 52 pixels away at the moment. But keep in mind that this runs on any iOS or Android device. So this was actually written because behind me is this big modular synth thing. And I'm facing away from the computer when I'm using it. And I was doing a bunch of work on a low roar record with the modular. And I kept having to turn around to punch in and punch out and do all the stuff that I then decided, like, no. I'm just going to put this on my iPhone, turn around, put the iPhone on top of the modular and run Pro Tools. So that's the idea behind this app. So this is built to be basically transport control, but it's really targeted to people who are recording themselves. Like, there are some extra functions built in that are really all about recording. So let me just go through the basic functionality. Here, this group of top buttons is basically the Pro Tools Transport. And you'll notice that it's in the same order. They have the same icons because I'm really good at screen grabbing and recreating stuff in Sketch. Gotta say, I love Sketch. But there are a couple of buttons that are different. But basically, this is the Pro Tools Transport. So if I'm in Pro Tools and I hit play, you'll see that this lights up green, as does the one in Pro Tools. I hit stop, and it stops, and I can fast forward, and I can rewind either from here or from Pro Tools, and I can go online exactly like Pro Tools. So these buttons are mimicking the Pro Tools Transport buttons, and you get all the same visual feedback that you would get from Pro Tools. So very handy when you're not looking at the Pro Tools screen.
So I'm noticing.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm noticing, Andrew. There's the back button and the forward, to the start and to the end button are missing. It seems like you've got some more handy features there instead.
Yes. So I would argue that the return to zero and go to end buttons in the transport are the least used buttons in Pro Tools. They're like the hi-hat mic on a rock drum kit. The hi-hat's so loud in every other mic, you don't need that microphone.
Of course.
Of course you need the microphone. But anyway, so yeah, so that's one of the first things I did is I replaced the return to zero and the go to end buttons with previous and next marker. So when you first open up the app and then you click previous or next marker, it will open up your markers window, which it did really fast there, and grab all of the markers in the session that are time based. And you'll notice right now, I clicked it and it took me to V1. So that's where my transport is. If I click it again, it's going to move me to pre-1, verse 2.
That's super
So it
handy.
goes in time order, no matter what order they are in your markers window. This will always take you to the next or the previous marker. And if you're in between, it will take you to the marker that is before or after. So
Great.
especially when you're not near the computer, to go through your song, if you know you've got good markers, well, great, you can just step previous and next. But then I thought, well, what if I actually just wanted to locate, like, I want to make sure I can always go to the top, but if I've been punching in the solo and now I want to go to the top and hear it, now I need either return to zero if the top of the song is the very beginning of the session, or I need to access a specific marker. So you'll see down here, you've got 4 open buttons where it says location not set, and that's because I haven't stored a location. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to open this window, which lists all of my markers, and
Right.
you'll see they're not sorted by number, they're sorted by time, and I can say top. Now,
Fantastic.
no matter where I am in the session, this will go to the top, and previous and next will just go previous and next wherever the insertion cursor is. And you've got 4 of these, so you can set, let's say I'll set this one for the solo for whatever reason.
Yeah, I can
And
see this
now,
being really handy if like you're working on recording the 3 choruses in the song. So you could
yeah,
just set it up to have one locator to the top and then 3 choruses and get right
exactly.
through. Yeah, great.
Exactly. And then, so the other things that were really useful to me while recording were to be able to turn the metronome on and off.
Of
That's
course.
huge. And again, these are all things that are super easy to do when you're sitting in front of the computer. But the point is, if you're like tracking yourself playing drums in another room, you can just grab your iPhone and bring it out. And now you can turn pre and post roll on and off in case you want to set up little
Cool.
pre roll for when you're punching in, or the metronome. So those are like the real sort of transport functions, but I think distilled into a place where they're a little bit more useful, being on your phone, and also getting rid of the return to zero and go to end and replacing it with the next marker, previous marker. But you might say, but hold on a second, I love the return to zero button and the go to end button. Well, if you hold down the
I love
command,
the return to zero button, Andy.
do you? All right. Well, look, hold down the command key and ooh, look, they're
There it
back.
is.
So the command key, if you're at the computer, will give you access to a second layer of things. So when you're not at the computer, this is made to be kind of set up in advance, put your locators in, and then take it with you on your iPhone or your Android phone or whatever it is, and then just run the transport, move around the session, punch in, do all that kind of stuff. If you're at the computer, then you actually get some extra functionality. If you hold down the command key, you'll see that those come back, but also you'll see there's some text on some of the other buttons. So you can turn loop play on and off by command clicking the play button.
Great.
So little quicker if you're actually using this on the screen than doing the Shift Command L keystroke, but whatever, it's something that's there. If you want to explicitly choose a record mode, you can say select record mode, and now all the different record modes are listed down here, and whichever
That's cool.
one you click, it sets it to that record mode, and now you're back here. And
That
then this record button does the exact same record ready, or in quick punch it'll punch you in and out, as it would do in as it would do on the screen itself. And then the last like super useful function was, I thought, well, I'm overdubbing back here and I'm having to turn around to make new playlists. Like, no, I think I'm going to make it so that I can duplicate the playlist of whatever track is selected, so I can record and then duplicate the playlist. And you'll see that this rhythm guitar track is getting a new playlist every time I do it. And if you hold down command, that turns into new playlist.
Oh,
So that's
fantastic.
just an extra little layer. So while you're tracking, and if things are grouped, it will work fine. So if you're tracking drums or something like that, you can do new playlist or duplicate playlist, and it will actually do the whole group.
I just thought of something is that uh, people seeing this actually working on your screen, uh, some may find that the graphics of Pro Tools can be very small, and finding those buttons can be really like moving the mouse and finding those buttons can be kind of difficult. And having the ability to change the size of this
Yeah,
floating deck is
because even this is not much bigger. In
it's not
fact,
much
I
bigger.
think it's exactly the same size.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's it's exact.
exactly the
It's a
same.
little bit bigger.
Maybe, yeah.
They're square instead of rectangles. I think they're the same width, but
Yeah.
they're squares. So yeah, yeah. I mean, it's look, it's the same thing with the offset counter. It's like, yeah, you can use it to do cool extra things to the minutes and seconds counter. This is another one of my apps. But one of the things it gives you is a resizable counter that's way more space efficient than the Pro Tools big counter, where you can get like a sea of black with a couple of green numbers in the middle, where this one is, it's a little better. And that's, again, it is the idea of this deck, is to get all of the things you need while recording right in front of you, easy to find. And you can, if you want to make it tiny, you can, but you can also make it absolutely gigantic and fill up a second screen, or if you've got a touch screen, or again, iOS or Android devices.
Great, that's
So
awesome. And what does the icon of your face do?
it just tells you what version you're running.
There we
That's
go.
it.
Okay.
That's it.
I
And
thought
what
maybe
it
there was a
does,
hidden feature.
well, okay, there is some functionality that's there. If you are running the transport and you notice that the buttons are no longer lighting up, what's happening is in the background there's a service running that says, hey, what is the transport doing, so I can show the proper record mode. So these will never get out of sync. If you just had like a button on a deck that was supposed to swap loop playback, it could get out of sync where it thinks that it's turned it off, but it's actually turned it on. And if you turned it on in Pro,
Oh, you're frozen, Andrew?
it will change the icon inside of this app. So the app is aware of the Pro Tools state. That's all being done by a background service. And if you hold down the command key, you'll see that clicking on my face will restart the transport service. It's pretty good about, if that service quits, it will actually put up the text on there so you'll know you need to restart it.
Oh,
But
that's great.
if these buttons ever stop updating when you hold down the command key, or they're not updating their icons or their status, then you just command click my face and that will restart the
Great.
background service. It'll also restart if you close it and reopen it, and it will remember your locators and things like that. So you can close and reopen it and it'll still be set up for you. But the fastest way to reset the service, if it stops updating, is that the functionality will work even without the background service. You just won't get the visual feedback, and things won't necessarily be in sync in terms of what mode loop playback is in or something like that.
Yeah. That looks great. That looks like a really handy app. So this is available in the store right now in the SoundFlow store. So if
Yeah.
you're a SoundFlow Pro Cloud subscriber, you should be able to head to the SoundFlow store and search under Andrew Scheps, and you should see the Scheps Transport Deck there, and you can just click install now, and that should work.
And there you go. It's
And
a
if you
little
have,
thing, but it's super handy.
yeah, if anyone has any questions, please ask, and we'd be happy to answer them for you.
Yeah.
But I think right now we can probably move on to the track selector. Now
All right.
this app, I know that there are a lot of like post production people who love this, but even just people, mix engineers setting up mixes and everything, that are going to find this really handy, especially if they're receiving sessions from a third party that they don't know how everything's set up, and they
Yeah.
don't want to dive into every single track to work out what's going on. So yeah,
Yeah.
walk us
So
through it.
so this is the track selector app, and I could have like pre-loaded the session cache for this, but I actually wanted to show you like what the whole process is, because what this app does is it gets lots of information about every single track in your session. So all of the insert assignments, all the send assignments, inputs and outputs, what type of track it is, things like that. and then it will allow you to select tracks in the session based on that. And I'll run through how that actually works. But I wanted you to see, like, this is a session. It's, it's not huge, but it's a typical kind of rock mix session. And to build the cache for it takes exactly this long. And of course, we're doing video streaming, so that slows everything down. But we'll
Of
see.
course.
We'll see how it does. It also breaks things, doesn't it? So maybe it wasn't
Possibly.
smart. So you
So it
see,
looks
so
like
there are
you've got
113
113
tracks.
tracks. Yeah.
And one thing that's cool is you can actually still play. You can use Pro Tools while it's doing this. This process is running in the background. It doesn't lock you out the way a lot of processes do.
That's great.
So you can actually just continue working on the session while it's doing this in the background. But at the beginning of the process and the end of the process, it needs the mouse to do stuff to make sure the screen is set up properly. So, like, while it's doing stuff, let go of the mouse, but it'll work with the transport running. So that
Yes.
didn't take that long. That's not
Not
so
at
bad.
all.
And it
And
actually worked.
obviously don't make any changes to outputs or
No.
plugins while that's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it can be out of sync if you
Of
do.
course. Yeah.
So what it now has done is it's gathered all that information about every single track in the session. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, just because this track has a lot of stuff on it. This is my lead vocals. It's a routing folder. So all my lead vocals are feeding up into this. It's got a bunch of inserts. It's got a bunch of sends and an input and an output. So I'm going to say select reference track. And what it's going to do is it'll populate the app with the assignments that are there. So it shows you your 10 inserts, it shows you your 10 sends, shows you your input, output. If it were a MIDI track or an instrument track, you'd see MIDI input and MIDI output.
Great.
The track name, and then the track type. So this is the internal Pro Tools like track type thing. And why does it do that? Well, you'll see in a minute. It's kind of cool. It's actually something you can't use inside Pro Tools.
So
Now,
track types, when you say track types, that's whether it's a routing folder, an
audio, aux,
track,
master
auxiliary,
fader,
everything like
video,
that.
yeah, anything
Great.
like that. And normally, like, okay, great, we know that's a routing folder. Well, why would that be useful? In Pro Tools, without any added functionality, it's not useful. It's a
Mhm.
routing folder. Like, well, so what?
Just
But
is.
with this app, well, I'll just do this first. If you click on any of the attributes of your reference track, it will select all tracks in the session that have the same attribute you just clicked on. So
Oh,
I'm
great.
going to now click on routing folder, and this will select every single routing folder in my session. So there you go. I've got my drum
Fantastic.
kit, my kick, my room, bass. Lots of guitars are being collected into routing folders. So it's now it's selected every single routing folder. Now, why is that useful? You have to find a workflow for it. For me, I use this all the time to select auxes when I get a session to mix. Now, let me be clear about this. This app is really, really useful, like Kitch said, when you're setting up a session that you get from someone else, for unraveling somebody else's signal flow and methodology. It's sometimes really difficult to kind of get your head around everything that's going on in a big, complicated session that you didn't set up yourself. So the idea behind this was I got sick of the select assignments to this bus, this right click menu, just being dumb. It just selects everything that's that. You can't do it with inserts. You can't do it with track type. So to go back to the track type example, when I get a session into mix, I will select all auxes and go through and see if I want to convert them to routing folders, because I generally will only leave something being an aux if it's a reverb, if it's a parallel process. But if it's routing audio from audio tracks to go somewhere else, that's going to be a folder. So that's how I find all my auxes. And it's great because I don't work in the mix window very much. I'm always in the edit window. So I don't have the icons at the bottom of the tracks, and it's not as obvious to me what is an aux. And this way I won't miss any.
I can also see that this would be super handy if, for instance, you've imported your mix template and you wanted to grab all of the tracks that you wanted to route to a specific, one of your buses that you have specifically designed, and you
Yeah.
could essentially grab all those tracks and then just assign them.
Yeah, exactly. So I can change everything, all auxes. If I get a session where everybody's gone through auxes, select the auxes here, route them to my mix bus, and I'm done.
Great.
If that's the way the session setup process goes. So you could select all the tracks called lead vocals, but that's not terribly useful. There better only be one. Otherwise, Pro Tools has let you do something illegal. But you can do the exact same thing with inputs and outputs, and something you cannot do in Pro Tools, you can do insert assignments. So I could say, now, interestingly, this track has 2 instances of the same plugin. It's got a sibilance in slot 1 and a sibilance in the second to last slot. I actually do this a lot using 2 de-essers. I put a de-esser on a vocal before there's any processing. So while the dynamic range is as much as possible and the S's are going to stick out as much as possible, but then after all the compression and EQ that might happen, now the S's are coming out again. So I'll put a second de-esser, and that way I don't have to turn them into like Thilvethter on the way into the processing. You can tame them and then tame them again. So, but the point is, I could find everything in the session that has sibilance on it. So I just clicked on that, and now it is selecting. There are only 2 tracks that have it.
Great.
Okay, great. Another thing you'll notice is it keeps opening and closing the track list view. That's because it will always put the session back to the way it looked before you did anything. I've been very careful about that because people hate it when you mess with the way their sessions are. So if I had the track view open, it would just leave it open. But because I've had it closed, it'll open it to do its work and then close it again. Okay. So you can search
if you're working on a laptop.
Yeah. And so you might say, well, okay, but why would I ever want to search for plugins? Well, what if you got a session that doesn't have all of its tuning committed? And you're like, man, I want to find every single track with Melodyne on it. And it's even finding hidden tracks that are inactive. Now I can run the Melodyne commit script, and every single track with Melodyne gets bounced. And I don't have to go searching through it. Because another thing for me, when I get sessions from outside, I'll see that they're using a particular plugin that might be like really CPU heavy, but they're only using it for a high pass filter. And then I'll see that on a second track and like, hold on a second, this is a workflow for this person. So I will search the session for that plugin. So it will select all those tracks, and I can quickly open up each instance of that. And if it's only the high pass filter, I'll swap it for an omni channel and put the high pass filter on.
Totally. So just as a side note, you mentioned the Melodyne commit script. For those of you who don't know, Andrew created another package that's available in the store, and it's a free download for all the SoundFlow Pro cloud subscribers. But it's essentially a toolkit to use Melodyne in a way that just really saves a lot of time. It's one of the favorites in the store for sure.
Basically, anytime I do anything that makes me angry, I write a script so I never have to do it again. So yeah, the Melodyne prep thing, when you get something to mix, or I mean, even if like you're going to have to tune the vocals, but there's nothing worse than realizing halfway through a mix, I have to deal with the background vocals. Like they're too off. I got to deal with it. And there are 30 tracks of them. It just and they all have inserts in slot A, and they've got like 7 inserts. So yeah, the Melodyne prep will drag all the inserts out of the way, put Melodyne on the first one, transfer the audio faster than real time, and then clean up the session. So you just hit the button, have some coffee, and then you're actually ready to tune. So, awesome. But finding all the Melodynes in a session to then commit them is really useful as well. Now, really quickly, I want to point out that when I search for these Melodynes, it unhid 2 tracks. In general, that's one of the things I hate the most about the Pro Tools implementation of the right-clicking and select all assignments to a certain bus, because it will unhide tracks that you don't want to see anymore. So at the bottom of this app, you'll see that there are 3 toggles here for whether you want to include inactive tracks, whether you want to include hidden tracks, and whether or not you want to look inside closed folders. Great. Now, again, keep in mind that this is tracks that were hidden, inactive, or inside closed folders when we did the session cache. If you've now changed and opened up a bunch of folders and whatever, it's still working off the information that it has. So if you've opened a folder and wonder why it's not selecting your track, you might want to update the folder info. So I might as well jump to this. You can update the information that the app has at any time. You can either rebuild the session cache, which will go through the longer process of going through every track and getting the inserts and the sends and the inputs and outputs and all that stuff. Or you can just update the folder info. So if you've reorganized things by moving stuff from one folder to another, or you've just changed like what's open, what's closed, and you don't want to lose that view, you can just click update folders, and that's a much faster process.
Yeah, much
It
faster.
actually takes longer to set up the screen than it does to do it. So now it knows what's folded. So what I can do is let me go ahead, and I'm going to go and hide these guys again. And I am going to say, don't include hidden tracks, but find me all the Melodynes. And now it doesn't show those tracks.
Great.
So it doesn't mess up your session. And that's really the thing I hated the most about what was going on with the Pro Tools right-click thing. But I'm going to show you why this is even cooler than that. But just the fact that it doesn't show me a bunch of inactive crap that I am not interested in. I want to know who is actively sending to something, not who ever had to send, even though that track hasn't been used in the session for like a year.
Very handy.
So you've got those three toggles there. Go ahead, Kitch.
So yeah, I'm noticing in above the or beside the inserts A and E, there's a looking glass.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
we'll get to that. I want to talk about the these down here first. These
Sounds
are
good.
the difference in the way it does a selection, and then we'll talk about the magnifying glass. So,
right.
At the moment, we are always selecting based on a reference track. Mm-hmm. So let's say that I've got my background vocals is now going to be my reference track. And let's say that I want to, like, I've gotten the session from somebody and I know that the background vocals are sending to the slap, but I don't like the slap. Like, there's something weird with the slap. If I right-click the send to the slap here and say select assignments to slap, it will select every single track in the session that is sending to it, and also the slap itself that has it as its input. And if you have any tracks whose output is set to slap for some reason, those will be selected. It's every single track in the session. So forget about the fact that you're showing inactive tracks and opening up folders you don't want to. Uncheck all this, and it's only going to be what's showing. But also, down here, you can say, I want, when I click on a send, I want the send only to select tracks whose input is that send's output. So if I click on slap now, it should select the slap track. So now I've found the track that that thing is sending to.
That's way more useful.
Way more useful. And so you can have the inputs, outputs, and sends, and MIDI input and MIDI output all have these kinds of selectors to say, when I click on an input, I want you to give me the sends. So let's say now we're looking at the slap, and I make that my reference track. But now I want to know, well, I want every single track in the session that's sending to the slap. I can click on its input, and now it's selected the two tracks that have sends to the slap, because I said, when I click on an input, find me all the sends.
Great.
Not everything. And you get same for output. Output can select inputs, outputs, or sends. So you can select similar things. So let's say you just want to find, like, oh, all right, I want to find everybody who is going to this background vocals bus. I can say outputs selects outputs, and it will just find the tracks that are going to the outputs bus. Okay. Or I can say, well, where the hell is that going? I'll say, when I click on this output, I want the track that has that as its input. Oh, there it is. So it's a really, really powerful, flexible way to find the tracks you're actually looking for.
That's great.
Which is huge. Okay, this has all been based on a reference track. But let's say you want to find all the tracks in the session with Melodyne, but you don't want to.
Just one question before.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that as you're selecting a new track, then you're going over to the track selector and you're selecting that button there. So that just basically updates everything that's in the window.
Exactly. Yeah, and it updates it to whatever the selected track is. And while this was in beta test, there were a couple of times where people were asking about, well, how about if it just did it every single time I selected a new track? But the problem is, like, your selecting tracks. So you'd select a track that was your reference, you'd chase down one of the sends, and then all of a sudden it's re-updated its reference track to be one of the tracks it just
Doesn't
selected.
work. That wouldn't
And
work.
it got to the point where it was actually not nearly as useful. So yes, you do manually have to update the reference track.
That
But
makes
now
sense.
we're going to talk about the magnifying glasses. With the magnifying glasses, you don't need a reference track. So let's take the case of trying to find everything in a session that has Melodyne on it. If you do it with a reference track, you've actually got to find a track that has Melodyne, make it the reference track, and then click on Melodyne. But what if you don't even know if there's a Melodyne in there? And why this is really useful for me is I work in small mode all the time. So every single plugin that has an M could be Melodyne.
Yes.
It could be something else.
Yeah.
If you click on the magnifying glass, you now have a searchable list of every single plugin that is actually used in your session.
That's
So
great.
if I just type Melodyne, I can select Melodyne, and now it will select the Melodynes, not including inactive, hidden, or inside closed folder tracks.
Brilliant.
You can do the same with sends. It'll show you every active send assignment that is in your session. Same with inputs, same with outputs, same with MIDI inputs, MIDI outputs, or like I said before, same with track types. So I don't have to find a master fader to select a master fader. I will very often search for master faders when I get a session to mix because I don't want them coming in with any master faders. So I'll convert this stuff to the way I like to work before I even import my template, because I know what the session wants to look like before I bring in the template.
That's fantastic. I just
And
noticed
again, for
one
track name,
button.
like if you can search for track, just if you want to find a track, you can just search for it.
Oh,
And
great.
this search is the really great SoundFlow fuzzy search. So like there's one called New Verse Vocals. If I just type NVV, it actually finds New Verse Vocals, which Pro Tools does not do when you're searching for a track.
That's
It's
awesome.
it's got a very dumb kind of search algorithm when you use the search.
So Brad Wood has said, "Okay, I'm sold." Damn it.
Good.
That's good.
Yeah, the magnifying glass was actually sort of a late addition, and it's made it to the point where I never set a reference track anymore, ever.
Yeah.
Like, there's no point.
Why would you?
But it's kind of a nice way to see what's on the track, so I left it in there. There's one other thing, and this was actually this was a feature request from Chris Shaw, which was to export a used plugin list.
I just saw
So
that button.
when this is like, I was thinking, well, when I get a session from somebody, I don't need to see a list of what's there. It either I already own it, or it tells me every time I open the session, you don't have these 4 plugins. Like, all right, fine, I'll go get the demo. But for Chris, he ends up having to send sessions to people a lot. So either for someone to do overdubs, or I guess if someone else is going to mix something, I think he mixes most of his own stuff. But if you're going to do that, it's kind of nice to be able to send a list to the vocalist and say, hey, do you have these plugins? And so it's telling me that I already have a plugin list for this particular thing. So it makes the plugin list, and then this is a very messy folder. I shouldn't have used this one. Just search by modified. And here we go. So now I have a text file that is every plugin that's used in the session. So you can send this to the vocalist who's going to do background vocals on their own and say, hey, do you have these plugins? And if not, they tell you which ones they don't have, and you can just commit or render or bounce stuff down or whatever you want to do.
Wow. I worked on an album a few years back where halfway through the process of mixing, it was a change of mix engineers, and they needed to know what plugins we used. And it took me hours to go through every single track and work out what the plugins were. So that is brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, so just so you know, the export session as text actually has an option that you'll get a lot of other information as well, but you can export it. It's a little messier, but it's a little more detailed. But this is just a super quick way to say, what the hell is this session using?
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any other hidden features in there?
I don't think there are, actually.
I think that's just fantastic.
Usually if I command click on my head, like that's where a hidden feature would be waiting. But yeah, I don't think there are any.
Maybe in version 1.1.
The biggest things to me are that it doesn't mess up what your session looks like to you unless you want it to. And the selecting one type of assignment based on a different assignment. And that you can only do with the reference tracks. So if
Yes.
you're trying to hunt down a reverb, you've got to have the reference tracks so you can click on the send and tell it, hey, find tracks whose input is the same as this send.
That makes total sense.
If you search for a send, it's only going to find tracks that have the same send assignment. That will always be. So the search here is searching sends.
Great.
If you want to find someone whose input is that, well, search the inputs.
That's cool.
So the logic that's here is for when you click on the reference track. The search is always direct. If you want to search for an input, search for an input. You wouldn't do it based on a send.
Exactly. This is
that
super
simple.
handy. Super handy.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, look, it's not the kind of thing that I would use every day on a session, but I use it on every single session that I get in from somewhere else. It's the fastest way to decipher what's going on when you haven't set the sessions up.
I had
So-
a test session when we talked about doing this webinar. I had a test session that I decided to use this on, and the test session had over 500 tracks on it. And being able to go through and pick stuff, it was a breeze. So the people in the post-production field who have massive templates that they need to navigate around, this can be really helpful in the stages where you're prepping everything, the routing and stuff like that. So
yeah, and just moving from one routing paradigm to another. I mean, think about if you are mixing something in stereo and now you got to move over to the Atmos mix. So you
Right.
bring in all your Atmos mix buses and your Atmos reverbs and all of that. You can easily select everybody who has a send to a particular stereo reverb, then just shift option and change them all to your Atmos reverb.
Exactly.
Switch the mix bus, and you're only switching tracks that have that assignment in the place you actually want to change it.
Exactly.
You don't have to because if you search now for a mix bus, you're going to the mix bus and the mix bus, and you don't want that, and then you got to unselect it. And so, yeah, it just makes that kind of transition really, really fast.
Way faster, yeah. So William Whitman has reiterated something I said earlier, and that's wow, for any of us who mix tracks from other people's sessions, this looks like an enormous time saver and sanity saver. And that the sanity part is the is the main thing. I think that the one great thing about SoundFlow is that it's not just about doing the work for you. It's about keeping your mind in a creative flow.
Always.
And I find that if you're digging too deep in technical aspects, that sometimes you can lose focus of like what you're working on. And so yeah, that's been the biggest thing for me with SoundFlow. So
I think it's a real testament to the fact that like features are written by some amazingly talented developers, but they're developing features that they spec because it's spec'd and they get feedback from users and things like that. Every SoundFlow package that I've ever seen is written by somebody who's just doing stuff all day and has gotten fed up.
That's right.
Like every script I have ever written in SoundFlow is to make my life easier. So 99% of them are useless to everybody else. And that other 1% turn into stuff that's either in the store for free, or if it took me a really long time and I had to do graphics, then it's a paid app. But, I think with the time you'll save with it, it's worth it, I hope.
Yes, we have a lot to thank Christian Scheuer, the CEO of SoundFlow. Thanks, Christian. You're the best.
Yeah, making this exist is one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Coming on board with SoundFlow, I was actually a SoundFlow user, and I was saving, a good 20% of my day's work just by creating some scripts that just took care of a bunch of the heavy lifting. And
I mean, as Christian said on many occasions, he created SoundFlow because he was working on films and was fed up with getting slowed down on things and thought, if I could do this faster, there's my edge. And it's two things. I mean, it is the sort of creative edge, like, yeah, man, I can crank through this stuff faster than other people, but it's absolutely what you said of just staying creative and keeping your head in the game. That's all it's about.
Totally.
Absolutely.
If anyone has any questions, please write them in the comments section, and we'll answer them for you. But in the meantime, while there aren't any, I know that you have some stuff in the works. One massive thing that's in the works,
Yeah.
and I've been inundated with questions about when it's going to be released, and I know that
Well,
you've set a time. Are you ready to let that out of the
I
bag?
finally set the date. Yeah. This is like one of those things where I just basically kept putting off setting a release date because I thought I just couldn't get my head around actually releasing this thing. So it's called Bounce Factory, and it is coming out on the 28th. And there will be a webinar on my Andrew Talks to Awesome People time slot. So that one will be hosted through PureMix, and I'll be
Fantastic,
going. What's that?
fantastic. That's great. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're hosting that guy. So it'll be, I think all the clocks will have changed at that point. So we'll be back to 11 a.m. West Coast time, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 7 p.m. UK time, and you can figure out all the rest of it.
I'll be
And
tuning
yeah, it's the app that I've been working on for 2 solid years. And I've used it to bounce every single mix I've bounced in the last 8 months. And there have been a lot of people beta testing it, which has been super helpful, getting other people's workflows to work with it. And I'll be spending probably well over 2 hours just blabbing about that thing on the 28th. So
looking forward to that. That's great.
yeah, that'll be out.
Yeah, it's yeah, I've heard great reports of people leaving their computer overnight and coming back to hundreds of stems being
Yeah,
printed.
yeah. I mean, like one of my favorite thing. I sent a screenshot to somebody, which was like the text I got that said mix pass, I don't know, 137 of 137 has finished. Your mixes are ready.
That's
And
awesome.
I just woke up. It's pretty
That's
great.
brilliant.
It's
That's
pretty
brilliant.
great. I think like these were definitely born out of like very small niggly things. Like I want to record myself and not have it be a pain in the ass and not have to have a controller back there. Like I don't need to run Ethernet and run my dock back there because my dock is up front. Like that's where I want it. So and there are plenty of iOS little like Huey emulators and stuff like that, but none of them would duplicate a playlist for me. None of them would turn the click on and off. Like all the stuff I really wanted it to do without having to turn around. And this is how lazy I am. I can reach my modular right now. Like I could probably reach the keyboard, but it was just bumming me out. So
Totally.
And the track selector thing exactly the same way. I was in the middle of prepping one record that was just driving me nuts because there were hundreds of tracks still in the session that were hidden and inactive, but I couldn't get rid of them because there were some decisions I hadn't made. And I just thought, I have to do this. I can't go through this anymore. So
Fantastic.
it's great. It's great that these things are always born out of actual use cases.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, with the transport deck,
Yeah.
is there a version of that for the Stream Deck?
I don't think there is. And the reason was because actually, I can't. Let me look. I might be talking out of turn. I don't think there is. Oh, no, there is. There's a 5x3 version of it.
Great, that's awesome. So anyone with
Yeah.
a Stream Deck will be able to use that.
Yeah.
And
The problem with that, I can't remember because I don't think I've run it on a Stream Deck. Well, let me see what happens. I can't remember if the buttons update in real time, and I think that was my rationale for not initially doing it for Stream Deck
okay,
because I don't think the buttons can update in real time. So I wish I really knew the answer to that question.
okay, yeah. Well,
But you
I'll be
can
sure to
absolutely
test
load it
it out.
up on a Stream Deck. You just may not get the visual
The
feedback.
visual feedback, yes, yeah, great. But it's going to be super handy. Like if you've got an iPhone sitting by, like I can, I'm definitely going to be using that one. The next album I'm tracking guitars on because I hate being in front of the computer when I'm tracking guitars. I just want to have my guitar on and I'll just have like an iPad or something right there and creating new playlists, shifting between verses and choruses. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The locating to marker thing. It's one of these things where I start building these apps and it's like, okay, this is kind of dumb and whatever. And then I come up with one thing that's like, oh, hold on a second. This just made this super cool, like
Yeah,
naming the colors in the color deck.
for sure. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. For
I
anyone
wrote
who
the
hasn't checked
thing
that out, check out the color deck.
just because I
Yeah.
wanted to lock it into the color tracks mode. Like that's the only reason that thing existed. But
Yeah,
then once I got the colors, the names going, like, oh, hold on, okay, now this is actually kind of cool. And
exactly.
that's the locating to markers thing was the kind of epiphany on
Absolutely. Yeah.
that.
We've got a question that's come in, and I
Yep.
believe this is to do with the track selector.
Yep.
Let me see. So when you mention, for example, shift option clicking to reassign reverb sends assignment, are you doing that back in the Pro Tools window or
Yes.
inside the SoundFlow app itself?
No, that's back in the Pro Tools window. But the point is that, like, if I came down here, let's say I wanted to reassign all, like, I would find my stereo reverb, right? Well, okay, let's say it's the slap, and let's say now I wanted to reassign that to an Atmos thing. If I just right clicked and said select everybody that slap, I would have to deselect the slap itself, and then it would have to go through the tracks that Pro Tools selected, deselecting the inactive ones because whatever, there's no point in reassigning those. Also, making sure that it's all things that are getting there via send and not via output. Like let's say you've got a reverb and you set up a distorted input to the reverb on a separate aux that feeds the reverb. You'd be selecting like everything that gets there. So I would make this my reference track. I would then say, when I click on input, select sends, the way this is right now. And when I click on it, it's going to select every track in the session that has a send to it. And now I can shift option without having to check anything. That was the main thing. I know exactly what it has selected. Now, obviously, if those sends are in different slots, that's up to me to figure out. But it just makes the track selection so explicitly correct
Yeah,
that you will never have tracks selected that you didn't want selected. Whereas that happens all the time using the Pro Tools one.
exactly. That's fantastic. That's yeah, it's going to be a great asset to those who prep sessions a lot for sure. So when you close the track selector window, I assume because it's usually something that you would use just during a prepping stage.
Yeah.
So when you'd reopen it, it would then ask to recalibrate so
Yes,
that it could
it will.
reread everything. Yep,
It will, and it's
that's
also
sensible.
smart enough. And I've some of this code is written a long time ago, so I might be making this up. And if I am, it'll be in the 1.01 revision. But I'm pretty sure it's smart enough that when you do this, it double checks that you have the same session open that you did when you built the cache. So it won't allow you to try and select tracks if you're in a totally different session. It'll say, "Hey, man, I got to do the cache." And that's cool. So yeah, but otherwise, well, let's find out. I don't think it keeps it. I think the idea was to dump it. No,
Yeah.
because it's so easy for it to be out of sync
Yes.
that while it's staring you in the face, and again, it doesn't take that long to do. I mean, this is 100 and something tracks, and it's doing it in about a minute, something like that, which is pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
So the idea was, while it's staring you in the face, if you go to select something and it doesn't select things properly, you'll go, oh, right, wait, hold on, I need to update the folders, or I need to update the whole cache. Long term, it just is assuming if you bothered to close the app and now you're reopening it, you need to rebuild the cache.
Of
So
course.
it's the only slight drawback is it just, because of the way Pro Tools gives out its information, it's got to go through every single track and say, hey, what do you have in slot A? What's in slot B? Wait,
Yeah.
what's in slot C? So that just takes a little bit of time. But once it's done, until you've changed a bunch of stuff, it's all fine.
So I know that there's a lot to take in with this app in particular.
Yeah, this one's not the most intuitive thing, maybe, but yeah,
But the
but pretty
functionality is
powerful.
there. Yes, of course. I think it
And there
has
is a
to.
walkthrough video, by the way.
Yes.
There's a link to a walk. Is that what you were about to?
Yes, I was about to say.
Yeah.
So in the description page of the package, so most of the well, all of the packages, the premium packages in the SoundFlow store, usually have a video.
Yeah, actually, pop the screen off for a second and let me see if I can
Sure.
show that, because it's
Hang on a
worth
sec.
showing. So let me switch over to SoundFlow and I'll find that. So yeah, the Scheps Track Selector, for instance. Okay. So
Ready?
yeah. So if you go to the store, you'll just see an icon of Scheps Track Selector, and you can say whether you want it or not. But once you've installed it, the main page, and you're seeing a few things that'll be hidden when you go, because I'm the developer, so this is showing the way I see it, because I didn't actually buy it from myself in the store, which is what I should have done. But this page will look exactly like this, and you've got a link to a walkthrough that I did that will explain all the stuff the way I walked through it today. And then it's got kind of basic functionality here that tells you what you can and can't do. Well, basically what you can do. And the same thing with the transport deck. So
That's
main
brilliant.
control. So there's information and documentation for everything
That's
with
fantastic.
each package.
Awesome. Well, any more questions anyone has? It looks like you've pretty much answered everything.
I talk a lot.
No, it was great. It's really great. I think people are super eager to hear about the next release, so stay tuned for that. But Andrew, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kitch.
And we hope to see people in the SoundFlow forum asking questions. If you've got any questions about anything, head to the SoundFlow forum, ask a question, and there's a bunch of us that are happy to help out with any things you have to ask. So rock and roll.
Yeah.
But till next time, happy SoundFlowing. See you later.
Is that a thing? Happy SoundFlowing.
Happy SoundFlowing. Why not?
All right.
See you. Bye.